Everybody thinks their lots are gold plated now. And 5 years ago, we were buying lots for $1 million, and now they're 3 million. You have to buy them at wholesale because then you have to get the bridge loan. So you got your finance fee on top of that, and then you got your monthly carry, usually a 6-month reserve that you build into it. So by the time the partners get in and take it out, a $2.5 million lot is already 2.7 in 6 months or 2.8.
It's crazy. Well, welcome to the podcast, Tim.
Thanks for having me, Brad.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. So Tim McCormac, he is the El Presidente, owner, founder, labor, pretty much like a lot of us small business owners, all the above at Temac Development here locally. So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's fun having the peers on, especially because you and I, we really haven't competed, ever, even though we play in the same sandbox. You and I share quite a bit of trade partners. So I always appreciate the friendship relationship that you're willing to share. JD with Sticks and Bricks. We have a few of us, Brady with Fenn Rogers.
Yep.
Where does that come from? I guess we're pretty young, so maybe that's part of it. We're kind of fighting, to make our way up the top, I guess.
I think it comes from, well, we've been in, you hooked me up with like CBUSA. We've been in a lot of the same functions. We've always been cool. We've been coming up in the luxury home stuff at the same time. And I've always just believed in being cool to everybody. And just sharing the information. You and I have leaned on each other quite a few times over the last few years for trade partners and questions. And, you've connected me with like Sonor and Biz, and they've helped tighten up the books and the CFO status and stuff over here from a business operational side has been great to have you as an ally.
Well, same thing. I appreciate, and I will say it makes it easier too. Again, like I mentioned, we don't really compete. I think maybe one job. And when you lose a project to like Tim, you're like, all right, well, they're in good hands, So it's like,
exactly.
It's always a better feeling, than normal.
Yeah. I agree 100%.
So for you, Tim, what's unique is where we differ a little bit as far as operations. You have build to suit, you have spec homes, you do development, you also self-perform a lot of work. How do you, just a question for you personally, like how do you function when you have three different entities that are run completely different?
It does get a little confusing, especially with like builder trend. Now that we're 100% into builder trend with jobs and pulling out like framing or any of the scopes that we self-perform has been a little bit challenging. But now we've got the cost code numbers that we input into our cost projection sheets, and the guys know to clock into those hours through our timesheets and daily logs. Sometimes the daily logs aren't caught though, so the PM or project coordinator has to go through and kind of stay on top of that billing side. I would say it'd probably be a whole lot easier to bill 100% of everything, but we're just pretty hands-on with a lot of stuff. We've got our own equipment, excavators and skid steers, and so we're always either moving materials, or if we bump into a hard dig, instead of the guys charging us $500 an hour, we'll hop on our own equipment and start hammering, and especially our own specs. But we like to offer that same stuff to our build to suit clients as well. There's always extra dirt left over on the property and export, any of that kind of stuff. So we've got dump trailers, and we're kind of set up to self-perform and that work, depending on where you're starting with projects or ending with projects. If we're in a high or a low, it's always easy to move those guys into those spots on that stuff and do the self-perform work.
Do you ever, I totally understand, especially as you're self-performing, you mentioned hard dig, which is a good example because it could be really costly. Just for a point of reference for those listening, I'm sure, we may bid a project, same as you, Tim, where you may have a budget of 150 grand for hard dig. On some of these hillsides, a couple of excavators like Brad, you need to put an allowance of 300,000. These can be really big numbers. And it's hard. The allowance is hard because it's based on hourly. As you mentioned, we're charged by the hour, $400 or $500 an hour, same as you. And so until you really get into it, it could be 60,000, could be 120, makes it tough. It makes sense for specs because you can control that cost, and you have the wear and tear of the equipment that I'm sure you're billing to some extent. But how do you create a value to the client to say, hey, I'm self-performing, where they don't lean on you and say, okay, Tim, we need other bids? How do you create a market value so they're okay with you, in those areas that you are performing yourself?
Usually we could gain speed with with any of those scopes, and we can offer a better price. Like our underground utility company, those guys are 350, 450, 550 an hour to start the hard dig. And they usually start it before they ask you if you've been in the position of that and your super hasn't stopped them. Like we stop, we issue the paperwork. We'll issue before we go into the hard dig though, we tell them we'll start tracking the hours. But if, if, if it's on like retaining walls, that we didn't catch when we over excavated the pad, we'll just say we'll hop on it for $150 an hour versus $350 an hour. So it makes the equipment, pays for the equipment. It picks us up a day or two on the speed having our equipment there. Like if the the fence guy is not going to have the hard dig equipment, he's going to have to switch up and bring over his hammer when they're just digging regular footings. Or if we didn't catch it during the mass grading, that's one of the scenarios. How we like to do those pads is when the biggest equipment's out there, we like to lay out the storm drains, find out if there's any hard dig in any of the areas that's going to be below 3 feet.
So how, I guess a question for you, Tim, is it completely makes sense, the discounted rate, if you will, is paying for the equipment. But the manpower side, you have to have someone that's qualified that can, run the equipment, that
Yep.
can read elevations, understands, where the footings are going to be. They can read civil drawings. How do you balance someone on staff, whether you can keep them busy 24/7 or they're piece rating, piecemealing this, how does it work just internally to make sure you have the correct staff?
We multitask with the crew. We've got project coordinators, um, or site coordinators is what I would call it. They would run the equipment around, or they're doing the hard work, or they're the ones that are cleaning. They can also run the equipment. They've been trained by our Bobcat guys how to use all of the equipment. They also service the equipment too. But we've got project engineers that we hire out of ASU, out of Del Webb, and we also have our own survey equipment. So they know how to run all of the survey equipment. We take all of the points. We do all the calculations through the survey team. We minimize the actual survey trips out to our projects, and we put all of the point sheets into all of our survey equipment. So we're like right there on top of everybody that's doing anything civil at the same time, which we've found that gives us probably another three weeks added to our schedule of faster versus having to call these survey guys out because you're always on their schedule. If you don't schedule them properly, or your super forgets to call them because they have a 2 day lead time and 2 to 4 day lead time, we just decided to start doing all uh, on our own, especially during COVID. And the survey guys are real hard to get right now. They don't want to come out to a custom home 25 times.
Mm-hmm.
You've probably experienced some of that.
Oh, for sure. So entrepreneurship's always interesting to me in the sense. I mean, for you that's self-performing so many areas, Tim, and you have your general contracting company as well. Do you feel that starting these companies, was this for competitive advantage? Is it for time? I mean, strategy behind running all the different entities? Because the reality is you only have so much time in the day. So you're trying to balance all this as well.
It sounds like a lot more than it is. I just got frustrated with working with the other companies because I could find to be a little bit faster and have a better edge doing it myself. If we need a saw cut a floor, I've got two big saws, so I've just always been that hands on, and I found it to be a little bit cheaper for us to do it and faster. That's just, uh, and we control it a little bit more. Is it a little bit more of a pain sometimes? But when the team is in full sync and everybody's in the know for what's happening when it's supposed to happen, it works really smooth. Sounds more than it is.
Well, I know you have a few. I mean, you mentioned you could saw cut, you can do your own utilities, you can do your own hard dig, general
Yeah,
excavation, I'm sure with the Bobcat. I know you have your own concrete truck, right? You and I
three of
have
them.
talked about, yeah, you have 3 trucks, which we'll come
Yep.
back to that. Any other scopes of work that you're self-performing typically on a project?
Um, I have been using for the same probably for 3 or 4 years a piece framing crew where we would come in and bid our own framing out, and that was another advantage that we got to work with daily on our schedule, and it had a little bit of profit, not much, but we had our own team, guys that I've built quite a few houses with. But once you can't use them all when you have two or three projects going on at the same time. So I usually have one crew going at one time, and depending on where we're at.
So you may have your, maybe not your A crew, but your piece crew working on one project that probably makes the most sense, and then subbing out, other framing crews depending on what you
Yeah.
have,
Yes.
with overlap, with the current projects.
Yep. That's exactly what we do.
So why three concrete trucks?
That's what you need for in rotation. If you have one truck, you won't be able to get the route like the number of pours and the cycle time. Most people, when we go pour, if we're doing depending on where we're at or who we're pouring for, um, mostly like I partnered with my mason, and we were able to get our site walls and our structural walls poured the same day. We wouldn't have to get kicked out in a week or 2 weeks. And if you were building the amount of projects that we had going at one time during COVID was crazy. I think I had 8, 10 projects at once going, and half of them had, big, huge site walls, retaining walls, and all that stuff. And so the masons and I just decided to go in. He asked me to partner with him, and I said, yeah. And we would get mud same day, and it was great. We were able to, especially when there was if you had guys where what was it? They had a 90 to 100 yard allowance. You
Hmm.
were waiting for 3, 4 weeks with getting our pads poured, just waiting in line for that allocation. That the biggest, most expensive guys had the most allocation, obviously. So that we also saw that was a way for savings on our side as well. And we have our concrete trucks pour them or deliver the mud during our pad pours too, and we give them the same rate as that they're getting from Arizona Materials or any of the other big guys. That it's pretty competitive and clicky. But we're on year two. The company's profitable. The trucks are stabilized. So we haven't lost a dime. Which is, they say in the first 2 years, if that's happening, you're good. And slowly working on the business to bring in more, and we can piggyback more trucks out of the same uh, yard that we pull from. So if we need 6 trucks for the day, we can get 6, or cycle in our 3 trucks as needed. So it's working. It's working.
Yeah, I'd imagine that, that business philosophy completely works, especially anyone that was building in Phoenix. As you mentioned, I mean, there were some pretty big, the chip plant up North Phoenix. I mean, there are some pretty big projects going on. So we did have a ration of concrete, and shotcrete for that matter, for swimming pools as well. And so, like,
Oh
if you
yeah.
have your own access to the yard, where you can have the mix and, the mud, makes a huge difference. For
We
you,
learned
Tim. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Tim.
we learned our lesson on shotcrete and pool guys, because we started pouring pools for guys, and if you don't have the right guys pulling the mud out of the drum, and they're late, you have to, if the mud sets, because that shotcrete sets up fast, you have like
Hmm.
literally 90 minutes, man, or it's done, and you got to dump it out of the truck. Or you have to send a little 110-pound guy into the tank, into the barrel, and they sit and they chisel all of it off the inside of it. So we learned that lesson once, and that's we stopped doing the pools after that. So uh, we got some really good operators, though. It took a while to get 3 awesome operators, and we've got them, so we're pretty stoked about it.
Yeah, it's good perspective. I mean, you think about, you make that mistake one time, sets you back cost wise, time wise. I mean, you learn quick. Any other, call it life changing business experiences, running the business and all the different entities you have.
I mean, it's you're still learning every day. For some reason, I just when I was a kid, when I was working for Pulte Homes in my early 20s, after doing like hundreds of houses, I was like, I'm going to go do this myself. And I think it's just having that. It takes the right brain and blood to be an entrepreneur. I'll tell you that, because if we've made the mistakes, it's happened over the last 20 years. That's for sure. But the practice is over.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I I think a lot of us don't know what we don't know, right? So I'm sure when you started Temac Development, you had a ton of experience with Pulte production. I mean, I started in production for a short time, went to commercial, and so despite that experience, a little bit different when you're wearing an operator hat, and it's you doing the business development, it's you doing the marketing, it's you doing
Yeah.
we're in the business making payroll, right? Signing the front side of checks, if you will.
Yep, absolutely.
What so along those lines? I mean, as you've hired and you've grown your business and you have teams, as you mentioned, you have, the manpower. You have these project engineers out of Del Webb, construction management at ASU. Um, what stress do you deal with on just a management basis internally with the people you have?
I would say performance sometimes. I mean, that's what efficient performance. When you have so many jobs stacked, you're hoping your guys see the efficiencies that you learn at like working for the tracks and the big national brands. I mean, those efficiencies is like how we build a custom home. You stack the deck with some guys start on the other side of the house when the framers are almost done. You start the mechanical across when you have 10, 12,000 square feet under roof. You can modify and stack the deck. That's usually what I worry about. And I try not to micromanage my guys. If I do see some of that stuff coming on, I'll step in, or I'll talk to the project manager or the project coordinator and have them tighten up the efficiencies, or we'll discuss that kind of stuff during our weekly team meetings and project scheduling meetings.
It's interesting right now. I'm sure we both want to be careful. I mean, we're going through year-end reviews, right? And it's always interesting, right? The feedback, like I'm sure, like you. I mean, my goal is always complete retainage, right? I want to retain all my people. I care about them. I don't
Yeah,
want to have turnover. I don't want to lose them. And the reality of any business, especially as you grow, you and I have a decent amount of employees, and so to some extent, people are going to move, whether it's fit or location or responsibility or their view if they can climb the ladder, per se. But you're kind of balancing all these different personalities and trying to make it uniform. And at the same time, we're in a position and industry where every project that you do, Tim's different. Everyone that I do is different. Everyone's set up different, not just from complexity of the lot condition, but also the architect that's on board, the designer, the
yeah,
the specif, the how specified the plans are, and so you're dealing with all these different items. And some employees love a lot of structure, and some struggle when there's not a lot of structure. And as much as we try to create systems, it can make it challenging. Um, as you look at just an employee feedback, maybe it's systems, maybe it's operations. Where do you feel that the biggest pain point is for your team?
it used to be processes with our team. If we didn't, like the last year, we've been working on actually the formal SOP, and we write 1 to 2 SOPs a week with the team. With my PE, it's kind of one of his special instructions, and then the operations manager goes through them, and the project manager goes through them as well. So I have had in the past where when you're smaller, you don't have time to write an SOP,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, it takes probably, we're in like month 6 and we're probably halfway done. We probably have another 6 months to have like a solid real book to do it. And that's been what having something for somebody to actually look at and open up a book to figure it out before they ask has been a problem in the past for sure. And obviously listening to your podcasts, some of our other colleagues' podcasts and stuff like that, it's actually put me more onto that business side because I it was explained. You could feel the stress from those situations. It didn't feel good to me that I didn't give the right stuff to my team for the success without having to personally micromanage them, either with us or the operations manager.
It's really interesting. I mean, it's funny how you and I align that way. That when you're early on, you don't realize the importance of structure and systems and businesses. It's you kind of are used to chaos, and you kind of operate that way, just being in construction. But the value, right? And it really comes down to how we retain our employees. Having that structure. What as you look back now, I mean, you guys have done some incredible projects and some amazing things here in the valley. What project are you most proud of?
Let's see. My first real big spec house was a pretty cool one. I was on the team that built it, so I like smoked it with my guys. I built 7,200 square feet livable in like 9 months in pre-COVID too, right? It
Yeah.
wasn't. We didn't have to deal with everything we have now. I mean, add 6 months to what we used to do like pre-COVID, and it was called the Iconic House, and I did it with Renee D over at Iconic
Hmm.
Life magazine and Mark Candelaria. they paired me with 22 different interior designers, like halfway into the job, and said, "Hey, this is going to be a good marketing program." And I was like, "Oh man!" And my wife, she's the interior designer for our firm, and we've got a design team under her as well. And she was like, "Are you kidding me?" So she actually worked with 22 designers to make all 22 designers look good throughout the house with the cohesiveness of her design at the same time. And I mean, she crushed it. And the house turned out beautiful. I was over at the house last week with the new buyers. A couple from Aspen bought it. It changed hands from the original owners. And I walked it, and the house looked killer. I walked through it, the inside, it was gorgeous. And it's nice to see her work 4 years later, and it's still really clean.
Hmm.
That's what really gets it for me. I mean, that's what does it for me is peeling it back after you clean it and get the finishing touches down to it. But that project was probably 5 years ago. It was probably the biggest, my own big spec, right? It was my own development with my partners, and I've built houses like that for years, or B2B. I did a lot of custom homes quietly for other developers in Arcadia and Paradise Valley and Scottsdale, and they would just hire me at a cost plus, and I'd crush their builds. They would market it as they're the developer, and quietly I got a little TMAC. TMAC. That's how TMAC built was started, because if I had a TMAC development sign on their jobs, it created a little bit of conflict that I was the developer. So we started the TMAC built brand. And when we build for other people or other developers, that's the marketing that we would use on that side.
Well, I totally overbotched this. When I introduced you, I said, I think Temac Development, and you've been
It
Temac
is
Build.
TMAC.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I branded two ways. Our jobs, if you look at any of the
Okay.
marketing,
It is
if
development,
you
right? On yours?
yeah,
Okay.
TMAC
All right.
development. So any of the stuff that we do on our own developments is always TMAC development.
Okay. Okay.
If we're building for somebody else, and there's another developer involved, we'll use the TMAC built logo. So uh,
Good.
that's how
Well,
we create it.
at least I'm like, did I miss something here? But going
No,
back to
you're good.
the iconic house is interesting. I'll come back to the Candelaria in a minute, but from the architecture side, but yeah, the house was incredible. I mean, fortunately, as you were speaking about, I was fortunate to go tour it and go through the open house, and incredible house. I mean, it turned out, great location, incredible quality. You guys absolutely crushed that build. As you look back, and maybe even at the time, I understand, Renee D has been awesome. She's, we were fortunate to partner with her on the Net Zero Iconic Home,
Yep.
a couple years later after you, pushback, whether it was your investor or you. I mean, I would imagine an investment team that's helping you put this spec together. Any reservation they had to say, okay, we do love the audience Renee's going to bring in. There are sponsors coming in. So I know that there's this event being the iconic house, even though COVID happened, which kind of affected some of that. But in general, what was the conversation around having 22 designers, being that this is a property you intend to sell, and there has to be some correlation and some consistency between all the different designs?
They were right on board with it. They liked that it was going to get more of a reach. As a result of it, we ended up selling that house for the most expensive house north of DoubleTree in Paradise Valley ever, and we broke the record for highest price per square foot with it. Combined with it, we got some perks from it, a lot of donated materials from the designers and stuff. It was sure you went through a little bit of that with your net zero house.
Yeah, it was good though. I mean, when you look at what Renee does, I mean, again, she's been on the podcast, incredible marketer, great reputation in town. She does some A-class events. And so I'd
Yeah,
imagine that sales pitch definitely brings a notoriety to kind of help, to your point, sell for the highest square footage. You and I have had this conversation. And I've actually told Mark that it's funny how I started this conversation. You and I kind of starting around the same time, being fairly young, kind of working our way up. Um, there are some signature architects in town. Mark Candelaria is one of them, right? There's some
yep,
great talent. And you and I had always aspired, hey, you do a project with Mark Candelaria, you've arrived, right? I mean, that feeling to know, okay, T-Max at a level where you're doing a Candelaria project, and, here you are. And I know from my understanding, you've done many with him over the years, many specs with him.
yep, yep. He's our go-to with that relationship for the spec houses. We've got a really good program. we design fast. We design really fast. We were into the one that we just broke ground on. We were into the city within 5 months with them on this last one, and we usually only have 4 to 6 meetings, and we do all of the project coordination alongside with them, and he's just been the an icon of my life. Obviously, and to work with him has always been a dream, especially when you're building flips in Arcadia. And I had this big lifted monster truck. I still do actually, um, and I would drive down Exeter and I could see over the fences because they were hedged and I knew they were his houses. And I was like, man, how do I get to this? And the hard work, the determination, every lead, you have to point at every lead and bid every job. And then I got to him, and it's just been a really great relationship with him because he's just a cool, humble guy. He's great.
Yeah, he is good. Have you been with him on any of the wine tours he does?
I went to Willamette with him, and my wife took my wife with us, and she found out she was pregnant with our son Mac. Literally the day before we were taking off to Washington, and she was a little bummed not to be able to partake, but she did go with us. But she was dealing with morning sickness and stuff like that. So the whole time she was a good player though. She was a great sport. She loved it.
Well, now you got to go be husband of the year and take her on one of these Italy or Spain ones that he does.
Yeah, I know. We're kind of waiting until our bumpsters are a little bit older. I get
Yeah.
Mac will be 2 and my daughter is 4. I would love to go with them. We tried to do this last one with them, but it's just the timing with the littles right now is not good enough to bounce away for 10 days to Italy, let alone work.
Yeah, it's tough to leave for 10 days for sure. I mean, especially when the kids are young.
Yeah.
Going back to the specs, I mean, you mentioned you've done quite a few with Mark over the years. As you look at these developments, from a development eye, not just a construction perspective, what makes you decide on what projects to pursue, right? And to invest in, like how, feasibility study, what is it that you're
Yeah.
looking at that you figure, hey, this is a winner for us?
It all starts with the lot cost and the lot. I mean, if you've seen, everybody thinks their lots are gold plated now, and we were buying lots 5 years ago. We were buying lots for $1 million, and now they're 3 million.
It's
We have
crazy.
to buy them. We have to buy them at wholesale, and you've got to negotiate them with relationships in the neighborhood actually, and being in the same little cliques of where we're at in Paradise Valley. You meet the neighbors, you buy the houses from the people know other people in the neighborhood, and that's how we've actually been able to get and help with getting our lots at a wholesale price, because then you have to get the bridge loan for that, so you got your finance fee on top of that, and then you got your monthly carry, usually a 6 month reserve that you build into it. So a $2.5 million lot, by the time the partners get in and take it out, is already 2.7 within 6 months, or 2.8. So typically the money's being made in the vertical construction side of it because we're getting the lots at retail, unless the lots are appreciating. So there's a real big feasibility. And like, what's next to the lot? How's the view? People are selling lots for 3.4 and they don't have the views that we have a
Mhm.
checklist. Like, it's a 200 item checklist on our early land development stuff: utilities, um, hard dig, hillside, half hillside, timelines. We don't like to buy anything hillside, actual hillside. We like to buy houses right below the hillside, because you don't have the hillside ordinance, you don't have the added time on the submittal, because the meter's ticking. So it's another reason why you got to build fast or efficiently without many delays, because it all comes out at the end of the sales price when you're at the end. And a lot of guys are, they build specs, but at what level of spec are you going to build?
Mhm.
I've been overbuilding my specs just for the reputation, so people see what my houses look like and what our team can accomplish. Because we don't have a huge build to suit, just because we've been just quiet. I'm not as loud as you are on the actual marketing and media stuff. I'm just kind of a heads down, but that you can see how it pays off on the build to suits. We usually have a couple build to suits and a couple of specs going, and then a couple of development situations going on.
Yeah, it's, the wholesale is interesting. So by your definition of wholesale, this is either word of mouth, knocking doors. I mean, this is pounding the
Yep.
pavement to find, a house that you can maybe tear down or something that becomes available off market.
Yes. And we've got, I mean, the all of the realtors in Scottsdale, and I've just created really good relationships with them, and so I've always respond. I'm always calling them, always thanking them for putting me on their list. And it's cool because you'll go see a house and there'll be five or six guys ahead of you, and it's cool to see you kind of climb up the ranks on who gets to it first. And it's funny. It's usually the older guys that have mentored me in my early mid 20s, and the older dudes in PV. It's cool to be in those circles with those guys and and come up through their ranks is awesome.
As you're, find these deals, and again, as you're comfortable, again, we're not looking at percentages or profits or numbers, as far as the bones of it, Tim. But as you're working through these deals, you have to have investors, whether you're self-funding some of them, whether you have an investment group behind you. Again, there's a lot of different structures that are out there. Some developers pay you, just a generous cost plus. Some will say, hey, do it at cost. You're not making thing, we'll split the profit 50-50. There's a lot of different scenarios. I
Yeah.
would imagine you've worked with a lot of different developers. Is there a setup? I mean, when you're doing a development, you're taking a lot of risk. You're trying to bring a ton of value because you're self-performing, you're saving time, you're saving money. Um, Exit strategies you have just as you're looking at a deal internally for TMAC build.
Contractually, we do a cost plus for the build. We like to also be involved in the actual profit interest. We have a profit interest contract with our partners. And if they don't operate in the four corners of both of those contracts, I mean, it's pretty simple. It lays out percentages, cost plus, everything. And I've worked with a number of great lawyers to actually get those contracts actually really dialed, really clean, and it's favorable for both sides. Your partners, your investors, everybody, and it's just open, wide open. It's in front of them. They know exactly what it says. You talk about the contract in person with them, so everybody knows what they're getting up against and the
You know,
deal.
yeah, and this relationship's interesting to me because, as you mentioned, I was just speaking with the client today. We're doing a build to suit for him. We're in design with PHX architecture, with Eric Peterson and his team. And the clients are from California. They moved here kind of on a whim. He was a big broker out in California. And, the comment was made. He's like, when we bought this house, sight unseen, looked great in photography. The problem in town, as you and I know, it's just kind of a hotbed for these specs and investors. And the problem is a majority of them are built very poorly. The quality's bad.
Yes.
They look great on photo. Maybe at first glance you walk through, they look great. But as you touch, feel, and you're walking around, you're like, yeah, the quality, the craftsmanship isn't there. And there are a lot of shortcuts taken with this client. And he was a little frustrated just that here's what he has. And you mentioned that, your brand, Tim, which I've seen your projects, as I mentioned, I've been through this is a spec home, the iconic house, and the quality was second to none. I mean, it's incredible. So that's always a tough balance for investors to be like, okay, Tim's passionate about the quality and the build. We're worried about the bottom dollar. How do you find that balance? Because that just means off the bat, not every investor is going to be the right one for you to partner with.
That's true. And you gotta we kind of vet. We have two investors right now, and we've been doing it for a long time. Um, when you get in with a new investor, sometimes you can run into problems, and it can go south because if they've got monetary issues, it could affect your side, and if they're not in it with you, you know, it's mostly the handshake guys, the old school dudes, and if they make the deal tough, in the beginning when you're kind of vetting them, and they don't give you the keys to the empire because it's us. We do all of it. We do all of the development. We do the land acquisition. I mean, we turnkey all of it, and we show them what the product is, and they love it. the two that we've been working with just really love it, and it's hard to go outside of that because we've got new teams that want to come in and invest, and there's different stipulations, and we haven't known each other for a long time, and there's a lot of guys in town who are selling their companies and like stacking super hard. You've probably seen some of that. Guys are selling their companies for 50, 60, 80, 200, 250 million. And now they're looking for developments to put their stuff into
Hmm.
while they're building their luxury homes. There's like, hey, let's look at let's look at doing another one or two. What does that look like? And it's just, you got to go through the vetting process with them. And, we've almost kind of JV'd with a couple local developers in town, with Rich Brock from Bedrock. We put the I've known Rich for like 15 years. In fact, my brother used to be a superintendent for him a while back, and that's how I met Rich. And we put that Roadrunner piece of dirt up under a contract that was like 18 lots, and we were going to have 18 houses starting at 15 million. But we couldn't get the number to pencil out where we wanted it with the investors, and they were local billionaire investors, and it wasn't hitting their cap rate. And we decided to pass on. We just canceled the deal because we couldn't get it. And then another billionaire came in and bought it. And now, now we're talking to him kind of on the backside of it to see if we can get in there and help him develop some lots and go through it.
Yeah, that's incredible. As you look back now, and you alluded to this now, a lot more savvy, right? As you've done development, your cost as a builder, what your exit has to be to make, stay in business, especially because at the end of the day, investors are going to flip the project, but you have to warranty it. I mean, your name's on there, qualifying party, you've done the
Yep.
construction, so that tail gets longer, it stays with you as the years go on. What advice would you have for others or yourself, especially as aspiring developers, entrepreneurs? Early on, I would imagine that not every development deal went great, maybe from what it looked like as far as the final numbers. Maybe it did for you because you had good mentors, as you mentioned. But as you
Yeah.
look back now, advice you would be given, that you're a lot more savvy now as opposed to maybe 10 years ago.
I think mentoring, talking to guys like me, I continue to mentor young guys that call me and ask stuff. So do you. Listening to your podcast I direct people to your podcast all the time for the wealth of information that you always put out there on what we do on a day-to-day basis is it. And being a good solid person to where people will actually give you the time to invest in as they're mentoring you. That's what I would look for. If people like our industry, I would find guys like you or I to communicate with, and because nobody was teaching us along the ways when we were
Right.
coming up the ranks. For some reason, the competitive, like, developers weren't teaching me how to get the money together and the interest
Hmm.
rates and all of the backside. I always had my budget, so slowly I found out the little secrets, and got to the money guys and that stuff. But it was with networking and putting yourself out there, and not being a schlep, and just being a solid, honest person with who you communicate with in the industry, and not using people's time for your benefit, but giving back at the same time. Um, I always like to use the phrase, when I jump in the water, when I'm around people and I do a cannonball, I want it to be like a Navy SEAL hit the water, and it's like there's no ripple effect. I don't like to abuse people's time, or I like to. I think it's a nice quality to have, to not weigh on people for your own personal gain, but to appreciate what people can learn and tell you, because you'll get a lot more out of them. And it's a different day these days, but I like to spend time communicating and mentoring and teaching my guys, some of our trade partners, teaching our trade partners how to be better at business, and spending the time communicating with them as well as they come up and grow.
That mentality is interesting. I'd be curious where it came from. The reason I say that is I know in speaking with you and JD, as I mentioned, from Six and Bricks, even from a trade partner. I mean, it's pretty easy where we have a good trade partner, and selfishly, it's like, I want to keep these guys for myself because they're so good. I don't want to give either an advantage to Tim because he's a competitor, whether it be price or performance or quality, whatever. But at the end of the day, there's a mentality to say, hey, I have this really good trade. I can't keep them totally busy myself. Why don't I have them partner with other good GCs, right? Like
Yep.
TMAC or Six and Bricks. And so there's
Yeah.
that collaboration. And I see, and again, it's not to disparage any other contractors in town, but there's definitely a lot of us kind of that are in the same, call it maybe age bracket to some extent, if you will. Like it's a
Yeah.
little bit more, collaborative, I guess you'll say. Just naturally, has that something that's been natural to you, like upbringing? Maybe it's your upbringing, maybe it's your background. What brings in, do you feel, that mental aptitude to be able to share knowledge, share strength, especially development side? I feels way more difficult than construction, because in development, you do want to keep it close to your vest. I mean, you want to have the
Yeah.
opportunities for you. You want to make those for yourself because the upside's so big. So to share that knowledge creates a very competitive environment for you.
Yeah. And growing up in this town too, I grew up with their parents were the biggest developers in Phoenix. So I was like, how do I get to that? And the climate 20 years later in business, you're like, okay, we're getting close. Like, how much more do you want? What's the level? But I think I've just always been just a cool hearted guy. I'll always try to be nice to people. I never really turn on that bad side until I'm really pushed, and just always trying to be cool. Because my dad always taught me, one thing he said to me was, you could go make a bunch of money, and either your name's going to be good or it's going to be bad. So either at the end of the day, nothing's going to matter on how much money you made. It's going to be how you were as a person and how you touched other people growing up and how your interactions were with those people. I can't say I've always been the nicest, you either, right? But I've got the heart to want to teach others in our industry because we need it. Our industry is failing because everybody's retiring right now and there's nobody coming into it, and so I'm telling young kids the same thing you do. Go to a trade school, don't go to
Mhm.
college. We were just ingrained that going to college after high school was the program. And,
Mhm.
you know, I did it. I was in college for like 10 years. I did the business program and I had to work the whole time. I didn't have scholarships or, my parents didn't pay for it. I had student loans. I worked, and I got through the business college and Del Webb School of Construction while working pretty much full time for 10 years. So it was a slow go, but it definitely learned a lot, and learning at Pulte Homes and then moving on from there. Definitely was a good. That was my motivation.
So why the pain point? Why choose construction, knowing how difficult it is?
Oh man, um, my dad was in construction. My uncle was a pretty big developer in Broomfield, Colorado, and Denver. And I think my uncle did about 1,000 doors in his 40 years of construction. My dad started a construction company in 1976 when we were born, called T&M Construction, and that was me and my twin sister Monica, and they were building houses in Vail, Colorado. And my dad was a Vietnam vet, and my uncle was the business side, and my dad was the framing contractor. And obviously that didn't work out. A number of years later, they split, and my uncle kept going on it, and my dad just was just a master builder. Ended up moving on to bridges, tunnels, doing stuff for like Hensel Phelps, doing
Mhm.
concrete structural repair that like only he could do. He worked for or not core construction, it's actually called reconstruction out of Colorado, and guys out here let core hire him to do the heavy hitter concrete repairs. Um, my senior year graduating from Del Webb in 2004, my dad was replacing the double T's of ASU Stadium on the third story, and he had hydraulic rams all the way around the entire stadium, jacking up the floor like 10 kips at a time. So there's never a time that I wasn't involved in construction my entire life, and it clicked when I found the Del Webb School of Construction after getting through literally like my senior year in the business college at ASU. I was like, oh, let's tie on another 3 years of math. and it's just been born to build is what I've just been after. My stepdad was a aerospace engineer, so I was building cars and hot rods and custom choppers like West Coast Customs at like 27 years old. Like anything mechanical or anything built, is just how I was just geared. It's been great. A curse at the same time.
It is. It's a blessing and a curse. I mean, I'm sure
Yeah,
there's some days you're just so happy. You're like, I love construction. I love what I do. And then some days you're like, why am I doing this? Let me find a new career. And I always laugh about that on the podcast because the reality is, I mean, I say it could be one day and the next day, but it could be, this morning as opposed to this afternoon.
totally. But it always resets first thing in the morning. You wake up, I get up at 4:30. I work out, and on the job sites usually by 6 with my guys, and then back in the office by 10 or 11, depending on how many jobs I hit, and then grinding after it, and hitting the office work, and that's pretty much the schedule.
So for you, when you think about experience before starting TMAC, I mean, you had, again, the education you had, you know, um, seeing your dad, you mentioned your stepdad was in aerospace, hands on, but your dad and, going through the different development arms they had and construction, working for Hensel Phelps and so forth. But for you working at Pulte, who's very system organized, it's a big company. Again, the quality you do now is like totally different. The beast of a project is totally different than
Yeah.
Pulte, but at the core, whether it was learning how to schedule, learning how to manage, a lot on your plate, throughout the day, benefits of working for a home builder before starting TMAC.
The process. When I worked at Pulte Homes, my mom worked in the land department, so I was able to get an internship. It was when Willis Martin was there. And they, like, the second year I was there, we did like record breaking 658 houses that year. And they trained me. I worked directly under, my boss was John Carlson. He was the VP of construction. So I reported to him, and then he would give me my special assignments. And my assignments were to work in every internal office. So I worked in marketing, I worked in customer service, I worked in accounting, I worked in the land department, I worked in the mortgage department as well. And I got to see all of those departments. And then I was out in the field. So I was a field coordinator, and it was when I'd have to print like 25 subdivisions of their construction schedules. People would bring in a floppy disk, and I'd download it on the computer next to the printer, and I would print like 5,000 copies of construction schedules. And like I had to work until like 3 o'clock in the morning printing these schedules. And every Friday, the guys would come in for their schedules, and that was my Thursday. And I got to see the cohesiveness of the office and how the land acquisition went, how all of it worked. And then I went out to the field as an assistant superintendent, and then moved on to my best friend's dad's development company, and we built like 500 houses in South Phoenix. So, and I had them subcontract Temac Development. So I was able to get the tax burden, the car allowance, and stack all of that. So instead of making, I think at the time it was like $39,000 a year for for a superintendent, I was able to get like 60 grand a year
Yeah.
with subcontracting my best friend dad's his company, and it was a great scenario. We had 10 starts a month and 10 closings a month, and at one time you would just have hundreds of houses, and you were walking like 25 miles a day on every house. It was definitely boot camp,
Well, it's
but
incredible. I mean, go ahead.
those processes is what got me into where the processes are today, uh, and that culture of the office.
Yeah, it makes a big difference. I mean, that experience that kind of alludes to at the beginning of the conversation, how you have all these different entities now, from development to build a suit to everything you self perform. And I mean, that's an early age. You're learning how to manage all this. What keeps you up at night now?
um, Whip backlog and uh, 2027, 2028. You
Yeah.
know, you know how we got these big machines that we're running, and the monthly cost. You have to stabilize that, and our projects have gotten bigger.
Hmm.
So, not to say that our fees have gotten bigger. It's kind of hard with the rates and to be competitive where we're at on the cost plus structure and what we're charging for project management and general conditions and stuff. But it's people are getting great values for our builds, and what we produce. That's what keeps me up is that whip.
It's funny you say that because, to your point, I mean that's one of the things that keeps me up at night. I always ask that question, and rarely do I get to build on it like with you, Tim. But when you have a lot of employees and you have, they call it a big overhead, there's cash flow every week, right? Client,
Yep.
trades need to be paid every week, employees need to be paid every week, and making sure you have enough work, because at the core of it, I think that I didn't understand before starting AFT, and I'm sure you would allude to this. Even if you're doing development may move a little bit quicker than a build to suit, but it could be a year, right? A
Yeah.
minimum year, right? And build to suit, you're probably 1 to 2 years of pre-construction. So a job you and I signed today won't come to fruition until
Yep.
2026, 2027. And that's a tough pill to swallow if you have a plan to do 4 or 5 projects and they drop out or they stall, or it's how long it's going to take because you have to hit the pavement and planning. And so there's just this time crunch to get these projects done, and you have to have enough in the hopper that that they do pan out. And it's a fine balance, because if they all go, I'm sure if you have 10 in the hopper and they all go, you're like, okay, well, now how do I staff them?
Yeah, exactly. Staff up, staff down.
Yeah,
It, yeah, I agree with you.
it's so tough. So what do you do for fun?
Right now, mostly my kids, 2 and 4 year olds. I mean, that's priority number one is hanging out with my wife and my kids. And I've got a couple of hot rods. My kids love driving around in them, so I'll throw them in the car and we'll drive around the block at 2 miles an hour and let the neighbors smile and smirk. My
Small and
kid,
sparkling.
yeah, and cars. I've always had a passion for building cars, and bikes. I don't ride the bikes anymore. They're mostly just show pieces that sit in my shop. It's just a little too risky with how big the city is right now, and ripping around on you know
Mhm.
choppers is not in the cards really anymore.
Yeah. We have to age out of it at some point. Maybe they'll come back though in a couple of years, right?
Yeah.
Um, what do you have upcoming and exciting?
Some new builds, some bigger development stuff. We've got a pretty big 30, 40 acre parcel of dirt up um, under contract up in Parker, 70 lots, waterfront.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, big development. Getting through the due diligence right now, so that'll bring 70 lot sales along with 70 vertical construction, or we might do a prefab situation up there. But the I had no idea the market was where it was at up there, which is cool. And we're bringing a really big named Mexican food restaurant from Newport out here. We've
Mm.
been working on that land development deal for almost 5 years, and we've got the LOIs going on with one of the hotels in Paradise Valley and negotiating through the ground lease. But that's a $20 million construction build on our side, and we are the developer as well. So we went out and got the private equity to fund it. So that's a big one for 2026.
Man, that's incredible. And Tim, you've done some amazing stuff. I know how busy you are, and I appreciate making time. And again, the friendship and collaboration, and one of the true champions of collaboration over competition. So,
Yeah.
I know anyone listening to this podcast will see that. And of course, the partnership in CBOSA. But for those listening, Tim, where can they find you?
Website, temac.com, and email tim@tmac.com.
Well, you're the best, man. I appreciate you, Tim.
Yeah, likewise, Brad. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
If you get value from the show, please support us by giving a 5-star rating and review on whatever platform you listen to. And I also have a favor to ask. We've had some incredible guests that come on and share their wisdom, their knowledge about their business. So if you have friends or family members that could benefit from those episodes, please share it with them, as well as any other business owners that you're networking with that could get value from the podcast or certain episodes. Please share those as well. Again, subscribe, make sure you're following. Any questions that you have, topics. We've had listeners reach out about certain guests that we should have on the show. Again, brad.l@aftconstruction.com. Email me for topics to address, guests that we should have on, and even if you think you'd be a great guest for the show. So again, thank you for all your support, and we'll see you next time.